Let's begin with efforts to broker peace between Russia and Ukraine. U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff is expected to meet the head of Ukraine's National Security Council, Rustem Umerov, for talks in Miami today. Witkoff spent almost 5 hours with Russian President Vladimir Putin in Moscow on Tuesday in negotiations which the Kremlin said produced no compromise on ending the war in Ukraine. U.S. President Donald Trump said the talks were reasonably good, but it was too soon to say what would happen, as it does take two to tango. Vladimir Putin later said reaching a consensus would not be an easy task, reportedly highlighting Moscow's repeated demand that Ukrainian troops withdraw from the Donbas region, an area occupied by Russian forces. Whereas the world looks forward to a deal that will favor both parties, two core disputes remain: the status of occupied Ukrainian territory and future security guarantees for Kyiv. Meanwhile, the EU announced a landmark deal to end all long-term Russian gas imports before the end of 2027, part of a broader effort to reduce dependence on Moscow. There's been a flurry of talks in the last few weeks on efforts to end the war. Let's talk more about this with global affairs analyst Collins Oweke, who joins me from Brussels, Belgium. Good to have you join us, Mr. Oweke.
Thank you. Thank you, Precious, for having me.
I was just going to say the right person for the conversation as we try and make sense of all of the talks that we've been having. Like I mentioned earlier, there's been a flurry of talks in the last few weeks. But this particular one that happened in Moscow, the Kremlin did say that no compromise was reached. And I wanted to ask you why the Moscow talks sort of ended, or there was no breakthrough with the Moscow talks.
Well, obviously, yes, there was no breakthrough. But essentially, what we are seeing is actually the unfolding of not merely Ukraine-Russia peace diplomacy. This is a recalibration of global power interests. The U.S. delegation, like you highlighted, left Moscow acknowledging progress. Mind that, they acknowledge progress, but at the same time, admitting that several U.S. proposals remain unacceptable to Putin. Now, Kiev enters the Florida talks. Now, I'm drawing closer to your specific question. Aware that the draft peace terms may ease Western fatigue, but could, exert painful sovereignty costs. The world is now watching whether Florida becomes, a diplomatic breakthrough or another stop in a long war weariness marathon. So it remains a very, very big wait and see, Precious.
And Russian officials are using recent military gains as leverage in these talks. And quite frankly, they have made gains in the last few weeks. But they also clearly believe that the U.S. has, heard the point they're trying to make when you hear some of the things that is being, said by Russian officials. What is at stake for Ukraine here if it signs a deal emerging from these negotiations?
Well, Precious, Ukraine risks compromising territorial integrity or political sovereignty if demands by Russia are accepted by them. Now, domestically, Kiev is also, facing political pressure due to ongoing, corruption scandals and military setback. Some have actually insinuated that, this was triggered by Moscow. So you see, this means that any deal will be judged rather harshly. Whichever side Kiev falls is going to be judged harshly at home, because it means that for them, political sovereignty has been offered, and then also territorial integrity are equally compromised. So there is a huge, thing at stake here for Kiev, for Ukraine. Yeah.
And is there a situation where there is a win-win for both sides? Because some of the sticky points, and I will get to that with you in just a moment, but some of the sticky points seems to be in favor of Russia, which is in some of the drafts we've seen, the NATO, the one that has to do with Ukraine not being able to join NATO, and then giving up some of the regions that, especially the Donbas region, that has been overtaken by Russia. Is there a situation here where there is a win-win for both sides?
Oh, that's very difficult to predict. But I mean, the much I can say is that inform. Both sides are closer, to peace, but not necessarily in substance. And there's a very, very important difference there. The machinery of peace, peace talks is active. There is absolutely no doubt about that. There is a willingness on both sides, and you can look at that as, a bit of a progress from where we were several weeks back. But the core question remains contested, and that is borders, neutrality, security guarantees, and sanctions sequencing. So you see, without clarity on this, diplomacy risks outpacing, legitimacy. So a win-win is very, very unlikely because based on the gains that Russia has made, in the past, period, they are standing on a stronger, negotiating position, and Ukraine is expected to make, deep compromises.
I want to take a statement coming from U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, and he said, quote, "We continue to be realistic about how difficult this is, but optimistic, particularly given the fact that we have made progress." And I wanted to stay with the term, how difficult this is. Perhaps the first time where we see the U.S. really realistic about, how it's not going to be easy. Initially, they sounded really optimistic about how quick they could do this. But at this point now where the talks are, what could derail the peace process from now on, even if the talks continue?
Well, what could derail the peace process is, two things, as a matter of fact. Number one, if Moscow remains adamant in the position that they have taken, especially around, Donbass. And then number two, and that's a difficult one for Ukraine, if, they continue to feel that, territorial integrity is sacrosanct, and that, sovereignty is something that is so very important to them. So it does look like, they are faced with a situation where it's got to be one or the other. Insisting on both actually is going to mean that, all the talks are going to be derailed.
Let's just look, because again, there's been a Moscow talk that has been said to not have produced any breakthrough. You sort of spoke on that earlier. Now there is the Florida talks. Why is this Florida session critical after the Moscow talks?
Well, it is critical because Moscow reveals the hard bottom line. Putin accepted some proposals, but firmly rejected others. Florida gives the US and Ukraine space away from Kremlin optics to, kind of refine a framework that protects Ukrainian sovereignty while preventing a frozen conflict that benefits only Russia. This is essentially why this, Florida is pretty much critical.
And just looking at all of this, again, I just continue to repeat the fact that we've had a flurry of talks. And are we closer to peace now? Are we closer to a situation where this war ends and there is guarantee that Moscow will not attack Ukraine again?
I wish I could tell you that we are closer to peace, but we are not. Informed, yes, because, they are talking. At some point, you recall, Precious, there was, a real impasse. Now they are talking, and so we're informed, yes, we are closer, but not necessarily in substance, because, there remain a deep division, very, very serious, sticking point. So without clarity on security guarantees and sanction sequencing, borders, neutrality, and all of that, I mean, it just goes to say that diplomacy risk, outpacing legitimacy at this point.
And I like that last statement, diplomacy risk outpacing legitimacy. Thank you so much for your time. It's for that reason I said that you were the right person for this talk. Global Affairs Analyst Collins Nweke, always a pleasure to have you on.
Indeed, the pleasure is mine. Thank you for having me.